All right. We're going to start up this morning. So first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of do an overview of what is going on in the West. And I believe this is part of not only what's happening in the West, but all over the world. There is a strategic, you can call it a plan, if you will, or agenda that is literally siphoning off from rural America, and it's siphoning off the finances and our industries. And it has actually destroyed a lot of our industries, especially on public land. So we're going to discuss that a little bit. I'm going to talk about first the real cost. The wolves are all across the West now. And in fact, a lot of people overlook the fact that they're in Minnesota and Wisconsin. And apparently there is more wolves, like double the amount of wolves in northern Minnesota than there is even in Montana or any other state out here in the West. So when we look at that, it's not just the wolf that's the issue. So when you're in Tennessee, like somebody is this morning, or North Carolina. North Carolina actually has wolves, just so you know. They have one pack of wolves. Or Texas or somewhere else. All of this stuff I'm talking about applies to you. It just may apply in a different way. A little bit different tactic. Actually, probably the same tactic, just different animal. So in the West, the wolf is actually not the actual problem. Now, the wolf gets us to fight amongst ourselves. We want wolves. Wolves are good for hunting. Wolves are good for the environment and everything. And then we fight about that while somebody comes in the back door with a checkbook and just kind of silently extracts wealth. And that's what's happening all across the West. And it has since at least 1980. And 1980 saw the massive increase in this. So we're going to start by talking about really draining money out of the West. And not West only, but rural communities, especially where there is... Oh, are you guys, am I frozen? Looked like I was frozen there for a second. I don't know what's going on. I have. Everything's plugged in. Everything looks good. Looks like my stream is good. Well, hopefully this works. So what's happening in the West is that we are getting extracted from in many ways. The first one is industry. This all started back in 1980 when they got something passed called the Equal Access for Justice. And what that is a way that the little guy, like any individual can not get run over by the government. It was actually a good thing. It was made so that anybody could sue the government, and if they won, or they forced the government to create a settlement with them, then they could get the government had to pay the lawyer fees from both sides. So you wouldn't have to in to sue the government, right? Well, what happened is that created a loophole for environmental organizations, because in as far as I can tell, in that act, it sets a limit on who can sue the government as far as their net worth on an individual like me or you. But it has an exemption for 501c3 companies, which most environmental organizations are. So what they discovered was that they can actually just sue the government to try to stop whatever is happening that they don't like, and then get paid for it. So they're making money from donations, these environmental organizations are, and some of them are massive multi-million-dollar organizations, but there's no cap on them for some reason. So they can sue the government and get their lawyer fees paid for. So they submit bills to the government after they win something, or get somebody to sit at the table and give them a settlement, right? Well, we'll settle. Basically change the rules of the West and halt wolf seasons, and basically stopped logging all across any public land in the West. Starting in 1980, they started using the spotted owl, and we'll get to that in just a second. So what happens is not only are you extracting the money from the agencies are then having to pay these guys their lawyer fees, but it has a multiple effects, because not only do they have to pay these organizations millions, they have to pay for the studies, and they're going to say, okay, we're going to log this section off. We better be prepared to get sued. So then they have to go, oh, shoot, what is going on with my stream here? I don't understand that. Everything was great. Everything's been great. I don't know what happened. Well, as long as it's still working, we're going to go for it. I apologize. It's a little glitchy this morning. I don't know why. My bit rate is really falling this morning. I probably have too many apps open on my computer. Anyway, so I'm going to just close some stuff here. This will probably really screw me up, but I'm just going to close some apps. Should have done that earlier. Just close this too. I obviously have something running in the background. Okay. All right. I apologize. This is, I shouldn't probably stop for that, but I want to make sure my stream is actually functioning. All right. Oh, Cle Elum, Washington. Awesome. So let me jump right back into this. So you shut down the industries using this tactic. Now, not only does it cost you money in your own lawyers and the agency lawyers, also you have to pay the other side's lawyers. So basically that's our tax money going right down the tubes to actually fight ourselves. When they end up shutting down an industry, though, it has a much larger effect. So let's look at logging, for instance. Logging was one of the things that actually creates a product in the West and creates habitat for wildlife. Mule deer especially. Mule deer are struggling all over the place, but mule deer love disturbance. So disturbance creates, like when you go in and log something, especially when we used to log clear cuts, you would log like a big old section of land, and you're churning up the ground, you're messing it up. Now, people hate to see this. They're like, oh, I don't want to see machinery up in the wilderness or whatever. And they don't want to hear it, and and I don't either. It's like, I want to hear that pristine thing. But the problem is that when you do that, the disturbance actually creates the forbs and the new grasses and the little bushes and everything that mule deer absolutely love to eat. So you lost habitat when we stopped logging. Basically we created these old growth forests now over the last 40 years that the old growth forests have very little feed value in it for animals, for wildlife, especially deer and elk. Besides the fact that if you're up in those, and then we added a bunch of predators, we keep adding predators, and we keep shortening the seasons and limiting the tags for mountain lions and wolves, and we got bears everywhere. So what you're adding a whole bunch of predators to those areas, plus you're not creating the habitat anymore. And that's shrinking the areas that these animals want to be. So that's one thing that is actually killing. And then what happens is it pressures the wildlife. So the wildlife are down on the private land, and then everybody turns on the rancher and says, oh, it's his fault because everything's on his land. Not looking up at the mountain saying, you just made that into a horrible place for wildlife. There's not enough feed. They don't like the tall grass. So when we look up and we see this old growth forest and a bunch of grass, we're like, yes, that looks fantastic. But the only reason we say that is because we don't really understand what wildlife want. They don't want that. They want the leafy bushes and all the little other, the plants that come up in a logged area. And a fire does the same thing sometimes, but it depends on how it burns. If it burns too hot, it doesn't do that. And you don't get any product out of that. So no money then flows into your counties. Now, you can apply this all across the country, but I'm just talking about, this is just one example of how this works. So in the West, we have lots and lots and lots of public ground. Now, I know in places like Texas, they don't. So it's quite a bit different. They're trying to turn a lot of that into public ground through something called mitigation in Texas, which is ridiculous. But anyway, it's another takeover of land is what it is. Out here, we have so much public ground, like the Forest Service and BLM and all that. So in our counties, the county runs off of tax dollars, usually property taxes, to supply their schools and their roads and their basically their whole budget for operating. So if you think of the county's budget for operating like a stock tank, a water tank that cattle drink out of, they don't need more tax dollars than is actually in the stock tank. They just need to keep it full. That is their total budget, okay? So when you have something like logging coming in, you have an industry that's coming off of Forest Service ground. Well, Forest Service ground isn't taxed as property tax. They don't pay property tax because it's the federal government. The federal government isn't going to pay property tax. But what they did is they added on a revenue tax of sorts, or revenue sharing, so that every timber sale, the county got 25% of the revenue right off the top for the roads and the schools. So every time you would sell a logging area or a logging sale, 25% of that money would go right into the county. And then the other thing was we had sawmills everywhere. So we had industry in our small communities. And these sawmills were taxed as industrial properties, class 4 and class 5. So what happens is that properties, because it's taxed at a different rate and it's such a high value property, then a lot of the property taxes for those counties came from taxes on that industrial property. And then we wonder why our property taxes go up so much, because now the county has no logging, so that 25% from the timber sale is not coming in at all. So it's like two hoses that you're filling that tank with that you just shut off completely. And you shut it off completely at the same time that you're actually extracting money from your agencies through Equal Access for Justice. So you're just cutting yourself off everywhere, and guess who has to pay for that? Then the people who live there do. The property taxes are raised. Now, this might not apply to places that don't have like timber sales, but any industry, an industry that produces products, is going to do the same thing as what I just described. So if you can shut that down, you put the rural areas in a very bad position to actually fight anything, because you don't have the income coming in from any of these industries then. And now you're beholden to the federal government, because when they did that, when they shut off those two hoses, they said, well, now all these small counties can't make enough money to supply their roads, and we can't raise the property taxes that much. So the federal government set up subsidies for small counties, which are called PILT and SLS, I think. Money. Basically, those are subsidies that get paid directly to the schools and for the road and the county for the roads to replace the 25% that we're missing from up on the mountain. But it doesn't replace the property tax that you were getting from that high value property in your area. So when people look at things like, oh, I don't want industry, they're taking it directly from the rural communities, because I pay federal taxes. I'm sure you do too. So we are actually paying now for the subsidy that was being paid by the industry that was creating a product that then was American made, and that doesn't count all the money that comes into the community from the workers. You got employment. You have a company then pumping money into a community. I was talking to one guy, a timber guy, and he was like, our company used to do our overhead was $50 million a year, and that's going into small communities, because when you're paying these people, you're paying all their extra stuff. They're going out and buying pickups. They're buying groceries. They're paying for things in the community. It multiplies the money and that's aside from just paying the taxes. So our taxes got raised. Our communities lost the infrastructure. We lost the money that goes into those communities from the overhead that these guys are paying. That's the issue. Now they've got us cut off, and now they're going to fill the gap. This is the thing. They're going to fill the gap now. What they mean is now we have a gap of funding. Okay, because you took away our industries, and you limited what we can access and what we can utilize. Then we run low on money, so that like the BLM runs short on money, right? Because it can't make enough timber sales because they're always in litigation. All their money's going to their own lawyers and the lawyers on the other side. So instead of actually coming in from timber sales or grazing, which we get sued on all the time too. So all of this, now they actually created a financial gap, and now they're going to save us by filling that gap with outside money. And that money is coming from Wall Street, it's coming from hedge funds, it's coming from the global agenda of 30 by 30, coming directly down through that. And I'm really sad that a lot of hunters are falling for this. They're like, oh, well, biodiversity credits, that's going to be the best thing for us because it's just going to make conservation happen all over. We're going to have more game animals and more. And they're forgetting that the industries that pumped money into the communities is actually what created better habitat. We had very, very low predators back then at the same time because we didn't protect all of our predators and put them on a pedestal. And that's the other thing is control. So you have a limited funds, but then you don't have any control. And where that comes from is the ESA, the Endangered Species Act. When they passed that, they basically gave everybody the endangered species of an area. They gave that species precedent over everything. So once something is on the endangered species list, then what happens is it, like say you put the grizzly bear in there, right? Or the wolf, and then you put them on the endangered species list. Now anything that may hinder that animal is easy litigation. So, for instance, this last fall, or I guess not this last fall, just a month ago, they shortened the wolf hunting season, the wolf trapping season, even though we can't even get our wolf numbers under control at all with what we have going, but they shortened it way down because a grizzly bear, which is on the endangered species list, might step into a wolf trap and snip his toe off. Might. It actually hasn't happened, but just in case it might, then we have to shut down all the wolf trapping season. So you see how this goes. That's the control that the Endangered Species Act has. So they use that as a weapon against us. And if you shut down the industry and then you gain control through the Endangered Species Act, you have control over most of the public land and a lot of the private land through that too. So we also have, but that doesn't give them control over the private land at the way they need to conserve it, which is, I think, is a complete bait and switch. When the global industries that are writing the big players that are writing the frameworks, they actually say conservation to get us on board. They're like, conservation, we're going to have conservation, so that everybody is like, yay. And then with all their legal documents, as far as I can tell, this is what I've researched, so do your own research. The legal documents and the contracts all say preservation, which is completely different than conservation. Preservation means no humans. In fact, the human is the intruder. The human is the intruder to, it's basically the Muir opinion on wild places, that we should be just looking in from outside. And that's what the push is for all these wolves and put grizzly bears in California. All that stuff is all to gain control of those areas. and then extract wealth from it, which puts us in a worse and worse position. So the more we extract wealth, the more we limit what we can make from those areas. It's a downfall of rural America. And when you lose rural America, you lose industry, you lose money, you lose the heart of America. It's what the cities survive on. You have your food supply out here. Somebody actually made a commented on one of my videos on Facebook and said, "Oh, Montana only produces, the beef coming from Montana is only 2% of what they use in the United States anyway, so we can do without that." So what this person was advocating is literally the entire state of Montana turned into a park that obviously I'm sure he views that he's going to be able to access and use, which is completely opposite of the reality of what happens with preservation. And there is a complete misconception that they actually care about the animal. It's the animal. We got to save the animal, the poor creatures that we're saving. Now, that's what the people on the ground think. But when you look at what they do, like in California, where they want to put grizzly bears on the mainland, but on Catalina Island, they're going to wipe out all the deer, all of them, every deer on the island. Why? Because it wasn't here before. That's, as far as I read in the comments, that's all I can tell. Oh, man. Are you guys still there? Because it just looks like I lost my feed. Oh, maybe I didn't. Anyway, this is what we're up against. So we have to, in my opinion, we have to do two things. We have to change the ESA, the Endangered Species Act, to not operate like a control mechanism. We have to change it to where species that are recovered are automatically delisted. You don't need to file a whole bunch of stuff. We can't protect our predators like we are, because that just gives them, the environmental organizations, the ammunition, the tools they need to lock us out, right? And what happens is we start paying for it, which constricts us. It makes us move to other locations. It restricts us even more. We lose jobs. If you don't have industry, you don't have any way to make money out here. And if you lock up the rancher through the biodiversity and the carbon credit systems, then we don't have any food coming out of here either. So you have. Let's take some questions this morning. Usually I just talk, but let's do some questions. And if any of you are seeing different ways of doing this, down in Texas, they're doing this through I was down there interviewing a bunch of people about the Marvin Nichols reservoir. And that doesn't make any sense to me unless you understand this concept. When you understand the concepts that I'm talking about and the agenda I'm talking about, then it does make sense. And what they're doing down there is they're saying, well, we need to put in a reservoir for water for Dallas or Fort Worth or whatever. Even though they have other options, they want to do it right here in this rural area. But when they do that, they use what's called mitigation, which means that if you flood an acre of hardwood timber, you need to replace it with like another acre of hardwood timber, or I think it's up to like 2 or 3 acres of regular ground. So instead of a 66,000 acre reservoir, they're going to take 200,000 acres away from private citizens. Well, the rest of that goes into mitigation, which, as far as I can tell, is just to pass it over to the government so they can put it in, they can lock it up like I'm describing. It's a transfer of wealth completely out of our systems. One of the ways we can... Oh, somebody said there's glitches might be due to the magnetic storm this weekend. That could be. Might be messing with my stuff. It's all about conservation is what they say, but they mean preservation. And it comes from this, it basically comes from the CO2 is bad for everybody All of this kind of stuff goes back into the same thing. And they use what's called ESG ratings, and now they're going to change all the carbon stuff because nobody's buying the carbon crap anymore. They're going to change it. So you're going to start hearing biodiversity everywhere. Biodiversity is the new buzzword because you can try to sell that to environmentalists. You can sell it to city people. You can sell it to hunters. Oh, biodiversity. We're going to use conservation and biodiversity. The problem is they don't include you in the biodiversity. Biodiversity is all about excluding man from the wild places. And I don't say, oh, we're going to exclude man from the... No, what you got to look at their frameworks, how they're structured, what they're incentivized, what they stand for behind them. And when you look into all that stuff, you find the trail that leads to you're locked out. So, I don't know. Any questions? Because I'm not sure if I'm even coming through very strong. It looks like I'm glitching all over the place. And I should have probably restarted my computer. I've been writing some code and things like that. I bet you I've got some stuff open that is messing with my stream. But anyway, what question do you guys have? I see somebody there from Michigan. And you guys are... Well, so somebody said, or somebody from Michigan is saying that we got 4 feet of snow this winter, so the deer herd is toast anyway, and maybe it will be the wolves all starve. Probably not. Here's what's going to happen. They attribute hard winters or some kind of climate change event with the drop in population of animals. But what actually happens is it just weakens them. The ones that don't die are easy prey. So anytime you have a really hard winter, the wolves do fantastic because, and you might wipe out the whole herd of deer now, but whatever's left, but they'll have plenty to eat because the deer are now weak and they can't get away. That's when wolves really flourish. Is anytime you have a massively hard winter. It puts pressure on the game. It weakens them. It makes them so they can't run away like they used to. So wolf can run in deep snow where something else can't. And it ends up with tipping the scale. So when they say that everything balances out, it does sometimes. It actually doesn't balance out, but it takes human management to get it to even come close to balancing out. But then you have a drastic weather event, and it'll just tip the scales in 1 year, where you go from, oh, we're kind of managing, the population to all of a sudden everything's eaten. Because if they can catch it, they're going to eat it. They don't stop catching things if everything is having a really tough time. So I think Wisconsin and Michigan are flying under the radar on the wolf thing. I would like to go over there and talk to them because the wolves are being used everywhere because they lock people out. They can lock the system down if they put wolves there. That's why they want to put wolves in California. That's why they want to put grizzly bears in California because it gives them more control. It locks up everything because they're endangered species. So then it supersedes whatever decision you make. Or any other... somebody said, are you having trouble with ponds on property being called wetlands and then government fining you for using water? This is supposedly happening in Washington. Well, I mean, you're talking about Washington State. That Washington State is really going down this path heavy. I mean, they're even selling... They're either just about to, or they're selling carbon credits off of the public land. I believe that leads to no access for people eventually and they don't have to lock it up. They just have to make it so heavily regulated that you don't dare step on it. The water thing is ridiculous. So up here, one of the major problems that we have with water is, a couple of them, but is the way we irrigate, I think. And then also we have so much timber. So the timber that is in the mountains, when it's old growth timber like that, it is sucking up such an enormous amount of water, and most of that water is utilized by the tree, or it goes off into the air as water vapor. So you're losing that to the atmosphere. You're sucking water right out of the ground and going off into the air. And we know this because when you have a big fire sweep through something and a big area burns, all of a sudden springs that haven't been there for 20 years will all of a sudden just pop up, and the water's not being used. So we have a ton of water that is being lost in the mountains that doesn't come out now. It just stays up there. So that's a big issue. But all this stuff is related. What you're talking about, pond water and everything. When I talk about credits, there's lots of different kinds of credits, not just biodiversity credits and carbon credits. There's water credits. There's every kind of credit you can imagine that has to do with a nature resource. And just remember, and you can go to the HighLonesomeSociety.com to understand more about this, because in our group, I talk about the actual parts of how this work, how the mechanisms work, how the credits work, because they aren't just a crop that comes out of the ground. You don't just sell water credits or carbon credits or biodiversity credits. They're actually tied back to the land through a contract for 20, 30, 50, or 100 years, sometimes even longer. And a lot of these short-term contracts, the ones that are less than 100 years, are actually auto-renewing. So that means that they renew constantly, which makes them perpetual. So that's what the real danger is. Who owns those credits? The person who owns those credits, the Wall Street special purpose vehicle or some corporation, is actually who has control of the resources on that land, whether that's private land or public land. Anybody thinks, well, the contract, we're just selling credits. Well, you're selling the right to the resources. So it's like a mineral right. So somebody is holding that. And whoever holds the right to those resources actually can have a say over what happens to those resources. No matter what you tell me, that's the way it works. Whoever owns the mineral rights has the right to the minerals. Whoever owns the credits, the biodiversity or the carbon credits or the water credits, owns the right to that resource. And it becomes an asset then on somebody's balance sheet. So I got to tell you something funny about this water thing. Somebody said, don't even think about draining land. So where I used to deliver horses to a place up in Lonesome National Park in Northern California, and because they had trail rides there, and there was this beautiful meadow right out in front of their corrals. And I asked them, well, why don't you guys graze that meadow? And they're like, oh, we can't graze the meadow because there is a mouse out there that is protected. So you can't put the horses out there because they might damage the mouse. I said, oh, so is this like a natural meadow then? It's like it's been here. No. They drained it. They drained the meadow. It was a marsh. They drained the meadow. Then the mouse moved in. And now it's protected. So that's how much sense this stuff makes. It's not about the same thing with the Catalina Island. They're not even going to let hunters harvest those deer. They're just going to shoot them and leave them lay. And they're going to do it with almost everything that hunters can't use. The spotlighting, collars, tracking devices, drones. They're gonna wipe out the deer on that island with zero regard for any rule and mostly leave them lay. So if they try to tell you it's about the animal, it isn't. It's about an ideology that is completely opposite of my ideology, obviously. So, yeah. So somebody says the wolf thing has made her not even like dogs anymore. And that's really why I think we have such a problem with the wolf thing. It's very hard to convince somebody sitting in a city that the wolf is not like their dog. They see them and they see wolves kind of in this family unit, that the pack is a unit, and they play and they interact and they see in their dog. So it really creates this wrong impression of what a wolf is. A wolf does not have morals. It is not like it's like your dog in the way that they interacts with other wolves, but they also kill each other very often. I mean, just look at Colorado. Colorado has spent millions of dollars putting these wolves in Colorado, mandated by a vote. It was supposed to cost them $800,000 or so, at least that's what I can see, per year to manage these wolves. And in the last 12 months, it's cost them over $4 million, and they've lost 40% of the wolves. 40% of them are already dead that they've put in there. So, I mean, what a disaster this is as far as economy goes. So you got to understand that the hunting industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Hunting drives dollars right into communities. Hunters pay for things. They buy tags and licenses, which funds the management of the wild places in the public land. But when you put in predators like this, you control to NGOs, but you also take away opportunity for hunters. Because if you're ruining the ecosystem, you're ruining the habitat with all the stuff they're doing, but you're also, you're harvesting the game. So that's really the key issue. Is another reason for the predators is they have to have the predators to say, that's what they'll use terms like trophic cascade. Trophic cascade means that when you take off a certain amount, you harvest a certain amount of animals, it actually benefits the whole environment. So they use that for wolves. Oh, trophic cascade, they healed Yellowstone, right? What they're saying is that's a replacement for humans. That only worked in Yellowstone because we couldn't really manage that herd because they were inside Yellowstone most of the time. Human hunters couldn't manage them like that. But so they twist this all around, but they say that's the example. Oh, look at there. We don't need humans. And if you think that that's not the replacement for you got your head in the sand. The wolf is the replacement for you. Wolf and mountain lions. Mountain lions actually take out an enormous amount of deer as well. So one of the ways, there's a lot of ways I've been thinking about, like, how do we change this? Number one, we have to change the Endangered Species Act so they automatically come off of the list. And states can manage them in a different way, even when they're on the list. Because you can't have a line drawn in the sand like the animal is worth more than anything else. You can't, the way it's set up, you can't have that. And negative effects on everything around it. But the other part is the equal access for justice law. We got to take away the exemption for the 501c3 companies. You can't have a multi-million-dollar organization getting money from by suing agencies because of a law that was intended for individuals to be able to sue the government. That's just stupid. But they keep it from being changed in Congress because they have so much money behind getting it changed. So, and what that does is it not only draws money out of the agencies, but then it forces the agency to focus all on one spot. Like a lot of the agency, the predator management has gone from coyotes to basically right over to wolves. And the focus is all on wolves because we have to spend so much time studying them and doing everything to try to get through all the lawsuits that, places like Eastern Montana and where I was, I saw tons and tons of coyotes and very, very few yearling mule deer because like one herd was like 15 deer and there wasn't a baby in there anywhere. And that's because the coyotes are hardest hitting on those baby mule deer. They can't really take a lot of them down when they get too big, but when in that first 5 or so months of their life, they take out a lot of them. So now they're getting overrun because we're focused all our attention on wolves, I believe. So people say I have too much food and we'll see the... So the food supply is a real issue with me. If you lock out everybody out of the West and you turn it into a park like they want to, it won't be a public park. It's going to be a private park owned. That's what people are forgetting, especially hunters. It's like, oh, yeah, anytime you see global organizations sticking their hands in what you're trying to do on a local level and you think that's going to be good to benefit you, you got another thing coming. This is not government coming in here. Our current administration has backed out of every single, which I agree with wholeheartedly, has backed out of every single one of these programs in the UN. They haven't left the UN, which I think would be a very bad idea to leave the UN because we have veto power. The U.S. has ultimate veto power, so you don't want to lose that. But they've backed out of every single one of these projects in the UN, so we're not funding any of that stuff. We've reversed the CO2 is bad finding from the EPA, so that's great. They're everything on the level of government that is making it so we're not mandated to do this stuff anymore. But what they have done, the UN and the WEF have turned to the financial giants. It's really Wall Street, and they're looking to financialize this stuff in a private way so that it goes underneath the government. So the money that's flowing in for all these credit systems is a way to gain control of the resources that we have in the West, and they're doing it, telling us they're benefiting us. But this isn't a government deal. It's ending up on somebody's balance sheet as an asset. So they're owning the resources of the West for at least the contract period, which if it's an indefinite contract, like if it's a contract that auto-renews, like a lot of these, then that's forever. So you have to understand, anytime those forces, we need sovereignty. We have to refuse to sell our sovereignty for corporate credits, and refuse to sell our sovereignty. To do that, I think we're going to have to make some changes. We have to go on the offense. The two issues I see are, of course, the legislation that they've gotten passed, which are the ESA and the EJA, talked about several times, and the general public. The general public and outside money. So we can deal with the general public by doing what they did to educate the general public, which is, we have to start going on offense and teaching the American public the benefits of hunting, the benefits of logging, what a real ecosystem looks like, what the benefits are to them. More food supply, which lowers the cost, better wildlife habitat, more wildlife. We can't just focus on wolves, because when we focus on wolves, we end up with a lot less wildlife. We end up with a boom and bust thing and tied up land. So we have to start literally marketing the reality of what happens on the ground, the benefits of these things. For instance, we have, and I've said this before, you guys might have missed this, but when you look at the moose population over in the Frank Church Wilderness in Idaho, they crashed so badly since the wolf has been put in there that in 2025, they actually closed that season completely. So the hunters have completely lost any tags for moose in that area. Well, that's not just wolves. It's wolves. It correlates because we stop logging. So when you stop logging, you end up with these old growth forests, which moose really don't do as well in. They like the logged stuff with all the plants in it, just like mule deer do. So, and the other thing has happened is we've suppressed fire because we have houses everywhere and we don't want anything to burn, which is fine. I'm not for burning everything. I'm for using actual industry that then creates the environment that animals need. And then we have that's the other location that they released wolves. So when they released wolves in Yellowstone, they released wolves at the same time in the Frank Church Wilderness. So the two things are correlated, though. If you lose the habitat and you have a major predator, you weaken the animals. Now we have, the problem of winter ticks, parasites. So winter ticks, these moose are actually getting so many wolves on, or sorry, the moose are actually getting so many ticks on them that they're rubbing off all their hair and then weakens them, or they freeze to death. They're saying they freeze to death, but how do we know? If you weaken the moose that much during winter and then you have wolves there, they might just be falling to wolves because they're now weakened. So we don't know that for sure. So my idea was this. We go in, and this, people would hate this, go in and we have clear cuts. Now, we do some logging in certain areas, especially on private land, because we're allowed to do it on private land still. But we typically are only allowed to log very small areas. So when you log a small area, what you end up having is you have a bunch of vegetation that brings in the moose. When the moose come into a small area, they just multiply the ticks, because you come into a small area that hasn't burned, and they just drop ticks and pick them up to each other. So they just are compounding the issue, right? But besides the fact that you just concentrated all the game into one area, which then can then be a much easier to pick off from predators. So we need to have a clear-cut system where you clear-cut large areas. So you spread out the animals. And one of the major things, I was talking to a logger down in Dillon, and he said one of the problems we did with clear cutting in the 80s was we had straight lines. So you just had a square. You just cut an exact square out of the forest, which just looks terrible, right? It looks awful, which adds ammunition to anybody walking by or experiencing that. Now, most of these areas, literally, you can't even tell there was a clear cut there now. That's the one thing about timber, is it's a renewable resource. But to make it look good, use the contours of land. Contour your edges when you go on a clear cut, and you leave strips of timber, knots of timber. So you let the sunlight hit the ground in a clear cut. Then you go in and you burn after you log. So you burn after you log, meaning you're not burning the timber. You're just burning everything off the ground, just like you would on a field. Now, that's difficult to do without losing the fire in the timber. But if you burn that off, what you do is you eliminate the entire first year of ticks. Then you go in with cattle after that for at least a year, and you intensively graze it. So it's almost like overgrazing, but you move them quicker. If you just spread cattle all over it, what you'd end up with is just the larva that's still in the ground. It would hatch into ticks. They would get on the cattle and just be moved around, and you just be multiplying them anyway. But if you use intensive grazing, you put a bunch of cattle on there, and what it does is it keeps the ground, you want to keep the ground open and exposed and dry. So when that happens, you kill all the larvae too. If you did that for 1 year, now scientifically you may have to do it 2 years, I'm not sure. So you have a contoured clear cut, you're going to burn it off, which kills the first number of ticks. Then you put in cattle intensive graze it to wipe out the residual ticks on the ground. And then you pull the cattle for 2 years. Now you have regrowth. The moose would absolutely love that. Then you start grazing it rotationally to keep that vegetation fresh. And you have the benefits of this would not only help the moose, it would help the elk and the deer, especially mule deer. You would also have to cut down on the amount of predators, obviously, because that kind of eliminates the benefit of this. Anyway, but you have that benefit, but you also have another benefit, as now you have a clear-cut strip. You have a built-in natural fire break for mega fires. So when a fire comes and hits that break, instead of just continuing on and burning 1 million acres, it stops. So it's always fascinating to me that people hate clear cuts, but they're okay with a burn that burns 1 million acres of timber that could be used for something. It could actually bring money into a community and create habitat. But no, we burn it, so we have to choke on the smoke all summer long. And then you have 10 million board feet of lumber that's standing there wasted. And then it all falls over and creates this humongous mess that even the wildlife can't get through after about 10 years. And if it burns, a lot of these old growth forests that we have now are so heavy with underbrush and deadfall that when they do burn, they burn so hot that they actually burn right down to the mineral soil, which means they don't grow back anything, which doesn't benefit the wildlife at all. So that's one of my plans for how to fix this. I would love to use do something as a pilot program to see if that actually works with the ticks and the moose. I think it'd be fantastic, but you gotta get rid of some predators. Humans are the best management tool. Human hunters are the best management tool of wildlife, and humans are the best management tool for wild areas. And it just looks bad to people when you see cattle, but they actually benefit the wildlife because wildlife don't eat the tall grass. Just like I said at the beginning, when we see an old growth forest and a bunch of tall grass, we're like, wow, that looks really good. The problem is the elk and deer don't see it the same way. They are looking at it going, wow, a bunch of old dry grass that has absolute nutritional value and some dark timber with a bunch of predators in it hiding, and there's nothing to eat in there. That's the way they see it. But we see it, oh, well, that's what it's supposed to look like. How do we know what it's supposed to look like? We weren't here 1805, but we're trying to imagine something of 1805 and then trying to manage it like we imagine. That's called fantasy world. That's what that's called. Okay. Yeah, I hate ticks too. I think there's no reason for ticks. Ugh. I've had several of them on me. We live in an area where there's a lot of sagebrush, and we have ticks sometimes in the spring. And if they're bad, they're just bad. Hate them. Okay. All right. Any more questions? I'm reading the comments here to see if you guys have any more questions. So contour clear cuts actually has a double benefit because contour clear cuts not only look good because they follow the contours of the land, like you follow a draw up a mountain, it would look way more natural, but also it makes the edge of the clear cut longer. And wildlife, a lot of wildlife really likes edges. They like to be just inside the timber. They use that as cover, and then they have feed out here. The more edge you have, the better it is for the wildlife. So that's a double benefit. So this is actually using your brain. And a lot of people say, well, what are your credentials? My credentials are I have learned how to use my brain. There is the data there in front of us. We've had wolves for, since 95, so 30 years. We've had wolves in here. We know what they do. We know how people use the Endangered Act. We know what logging did because we have the 80s and the 70s to tell us that, and the 60s. We can actually use our brains to find out what is the best way to create the best habitat while not breaking our rural America system and siphoning out all the wealth, which is what basically is centralizing our resources. We're centralizing our resources, and we're not centralizing it nationally. We're centralizing it globally. Boy, I can't see any reason why that would be a bad idea, right? That was sarcastic, just so you know. Is fantasy world reality? I'm not sure exactly what you're asking there, but this is the difficult part, is I believe we need to manage for abundance with people. If we remove people from the equation, then we're living in a fantasy. You are never going to manage 1805. We can't get back to 1805 without removing all people or whatever we have here, fences and everything. But to do that, let's say, okay, that's a good idea. Let's remove them all. If you remove them all, you actually remove a massive amount of your food supply. Now, who's going to make up that food supply? Well, that's going to be Brazil and China. So if you want to be indebted to Brazil and China for your food and think that they're not going to use that control over you, So you definitely want to be self-sustaining. You want sovereignty. You want decentralization of our food supply. We've seen during COVID how centralizing anything, supply chains start to narrow in centralization. So when you centralize anything, you end up with fragile supply chains. And anything happens on a global scale or even a national scale, a lot of times you end up breaking those chains. And it's not hard to break them because they're in one line. Or if you have decentralized systems where the money from an area is coming into that area and going around, then it's really hard to control. They call this inefficiency. Let me tell you what efficiency does, because people say, oh, well, it's more efficient to have one big company running everything than it is to let all these little guys run everything. Efficiency actually means it is more efficient in one way. When you siphon all the money and lose as little as possible of the money all the way up to the top and concentrate the wealth in a very few people at the top, that is efficiency in money. So that means that 5 people get to be hugely wealthy off of all the people down to the very ground, instead of spreading that around in a decentralized system, which is inefficient. So you got to think of it in a different way. It's inefficient, and it's not siphoning all the money up to the top. It's distributed, so it's messy. It's messy down here. Money flows around, and this guy's making money, and that guy's making money, and everything. But I just wanted to help you understand when people say, "Oh, it's a more efficient system," you have to think about what are they saying is efficient about it? Is it making sure all the money flows to the top? Because that would be efficiency as far as they're concerned, and that hurts you and me, the normal person. That means that we're flowing our money away from us and damaging all that stuff. So what are the next steps locally? So I've been trying to think about how do we fight this on a local level, because we have to understand that what's going on. I think we need to start at the state level. And, this is where we're going to have to really brainstorm on how to do these things. The state level has to start decentralizing from the national level and the global level, meaning we need to start taxing at a state level the dollars that are coming in from global organizations to make this happen. And I don't know how. I was talking to an attorney that's been dealing with this for a long time. I don't know how, but the main thing is the Equal Access for Justice pulls money out of our local communities and stops all of our industry. I don't know how to get around that. We have to actually change that. We have to change the way that law reads to not exempt 501c3 companies. So locally on the ground, we can do whatever we can I would say that our main purpose right now at this point, until we can actually move towards changing that, is to educate the public on what's actually happening. Right now, when I talk about these things, what I run into is a huge amount of opposition because they think that large corporations buying land to conserve it or using the credit system is actually closing the gap and causing conservation. That's not true. It's causing preservation. You're headed towards preservation, not conservation. Preservation is where you locked out and we can't grow food or take any resources from it because it's on somebody's balance sheet and we would drop the value. So we have to start just talking about it. We have to start understanding it and then talking about it. This is why, helping people understand the benefits of hunting, that human hunters bring money in and it brings food to your table because you can eat the deer or elk. The wolf doesn't. He extracts money and he's used as a tool to tie up more and more. And not just the wolf, guys. The Endangered Species Act is used all over. I mean, just look at like England, what they've done with the badger. Basically tied up all kinds of agriculture because you can't touch the badger, which carries tuberculosis and passes it to your farm animals. And then they shut your whole farm down. So the wildlife is used as a control mechanism, and you have to understand it first and then have the general public behind you. Right now it's an uphill battle because we've never spent any time trying to teach the general public, documentaries, videos, And so here's a couple of tips on how to talk about wolves. We got to stop the talking about things that we can't prove that just sound ridiculous, okay? One of them, and I've been guilty of this too, is talking about the fact that it's a different wolf. You know, they put British Columbia wolves down here other than the ones that were here. Probably true. But we can't prove it. So it's kind of an argument that doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't help our philosophy. What we need to get back to, the arguments that really help, in my opinion, are this is, and we also, I'm trying to get away from these totally destroy wildlife populations. Because when you look at the elk, they don't really. I mean, the elk have just moved to different areas. They're starting to survive on private ground instead of public ground. So overall numbers are higher. So that totally negates your argument. But not if we say we're replacing humans with animals, and that's not right. And it's actually extracting money and wealth out of our communities. We're selling our sovereignty for corporate credits. We are selling our sovereignty for a Wall Street padlock. That is the real, I think that actually has weight. And I think people won't understand that. Now you can talk about hunting in individual ways to really make this sink in. But if we get lost in the words, conservation, when they don't actually mean conservation, but they're selling it to you. So we have to combat this to the general public. I think there's a lot of Christian organizations that are actually making, like movie companies, that we need to start making movies that have an underlying thing that promotes logging, right? Or something to do with predators or whatever. Hollywood has been a massive hit to us because you got Disney, and especially Disney, but every movie has got, the hero is always some environmentalist, you're an environmentalist. Well, then we should fall in love. I mean, it's an underlying theme in almost every movie that the person that you should be with or you should gravitate towards is that environmentalist. And when you look at the environmentalist agenda, it plays into the hand of what I'm talking about. They're usually not the ones that are involved at the global level, but they're being used as a tool as well against us. Yeah, and this is completely against the Bible. So if as a Christian, I understand that in chapter 2 of the Bible, God puts Adam in the garden and says, your job is to create order of nature. And so this is the opposite of that. So it does have Christian context to it. Absolutely. So, any other questions? Let's see, wolves are a benefit of the state, and the state needs to feed the wolves. And so we got to understand that the state is really locked up in what they can do because they get sued every time they do anything. So their hands are almost tied. It's the federal mandates are what's locking up the state level, because the states, yes, they're not making some of their greatest decisions. That's for dang sure. But you look at like Colorado, that was directly, the wolf in Colorado was put in there because somebody got it on a ballot to introduce the wolves. It wasn't even the state that wanted to do it. And then they got it passed through public perception, emotion, selling emotion. And we don't do any offense, so nobody knows our side. We're just demonized. We're afraid that somebody might be mean to us on Facebook, so we don't ever actually talk about this stuff. And so when you hear somebody talk about it, it's like, oh my goodness, I can't believe it. And even, it's you got to accept that when I talk about this stuff, even hunters are not on board with me because they view the rancher as the bad guy. And I'm not saying all ranchers are great. I'm just saying they actually produce your food, and you don't want to put them out of business. Part of the Declaration of Sovereign Stewardship that I've put together, it's inside the High Lonesome Society, and I haven't released it yet because I haven't quite refined some of the parts of it. But one of them in there is we have to start a dividend. What they're trying to do now, they've created the gap The environmentalists and the globalists have created the gap in pay, in finances, but now they're trying to have outside influence through finances. So we need to pay for hunter access. Now we have things like the, block management, but that's very limited. I mean, it's very small. What you need to do is by landowners and access. Now that doesn't in the western states, it's not going to help us as much as in other states, because in the western states we have so much public ground that is now being ruined, and the game doesn't even want to go up there because it's full of predators, that we have a real problem there. But okay, let's see. Yeah, now, I mean, so somebody's saying put your land in a trust, and it, with tax exemptions. One of the things that we got to figure out how to fund the dividend that goes to landowners who actually care about, access and conservation and everything. We need to have a way to tax the people who lock us out. Because when billion-dollar land trusts or multi-million-dollar land trusts, whatever, come in and buy up a huge ranch, and then they take all the cattle off of it, and they don't allow anybody on there, and they're supplying themselves with, they're selling carbon credits or whatever. What happens is that whole area loses you just lost resources, you lost funding, you lost money from that land entirely, because now it's a 501c3, so they put a conservation easement on it. They don't get taxed. So we have to be able to tax that. We need to change it. So if you're going to lock everybody out and create this basically a dead zone in your area, then you're going to have to pay for it, because you're actually taking money away from everybody in that area, even though people view, these land trusts really help with conservation. No, they don't. They don't even let any people in usually, or one person a week or something like that, just to say that they do. Yeah, and now we have, somebody's mentioning this, we have this, somebody said, what is a carbon credit? Okay, have you guys ever heard of cap and trade? Have you heard the term cap and trade and not understood what it is? Basically, we have the UN all the way down to America even, but most countries in the world have signed on to this stupid thing called the 30 by 30, which sets a target of conserving 30% of the world by 2030. Now, they say conserving, but that's not really what they mean, but they get to dictate what the UN and the councils that they have underneath them dictate what conserve means, which is what I've been trying to say. It's preservation, not conservation. So in doing that, we have said that, everything's going to burn up in 10 years. You've heard this complete fear-mongering of carbon, CO2. So they pass laws to govern the amount of CO2 that a company can emit. So a huge company like Apple or Microsoft or Google or whatever is emitting through their whatever industries, driving cars around, data centers, whatever, they're emitting carbon. So they put a value to that. Like, here's how much carbon you're emitting, CO2 you're emitting from your company. And they call it a carbon, a ton. 1 ton of carbon is like a carbon credit. And then cap and trade is the states, like especially the coalition between California, Oregon, and Washington have created a kind of a coalition where they set a value, like your company can only produce this amount of CO2, which is the cap. So you can emit, let's just use 1,000. So you can emit 1,000 tons of CO2. And then another company, they can emit 1,000 tons of CO2, right? But let's say this company and company A only emits 500 tons of CO2 or credits of CO2. And this company over here, they end up emitting in 1 year, they end up emitting 1,500. So now this person has extra carbon credits. This person has used more than they have. So they have to buy, this company over here can buy the credits from this company that has extra. That's called trade. That's what cap and trade means. So what all the rest of this is now carbon offsets. They can take land like agriculture land or nature land, right? And they put a value on that you're sequestering carbon, or that you have your land, the ground is actually purifying water. Now they're moving on to biodiversity. So biodiversity is creating biodiversity. So they put a value on this, and they isolate it or separate it into credits that then corporations can buy if they're going to emit more than they should. So they can buy them. Now, this also actually so it creates an actual industry for the resources in your ground or on your ground, right? And that's what they did, is create a financial ecosystem of resources, because they don't have the money to buy the land. Like the UN doesn't have enough money to buy 30% of the world. So they created a system where companies have to buy the rights to your land to offset what they're doing. Anyway, that's what I'm talking about. So when you hear cap and trade, that's what they're referring to. Cap and trade is the mandatory part. They like to say this part is voluntary. The part that is on the ranch land and all that is all voluntary. But then they just want you dependent on their money, because if you can get them dependent on their money and you continue to sell those credits to them, those credits are sitting on your balance sheet then for 100 years or 30 years or 20 years or whatever the contract period is. They actually own the resources on whatever land you sold that on for that amount of time. So it's a way to transfer the actual control and the wealth from the land to global corporations and huge funds, hedge funds, things like that. And they do it voluntarily the more they buy, the better ESG score they get, right? So if you want to raise your ESG score, you want to look like you're really helping the environment, and you look good to the world so people buy more of your products and the UN pats you on the back, then you do more of the buying. You put more of those on there. And so the more you buy of that, the better you look. So it's an incentive program. In fact, you even get better loans and better interest from world banks by doing that. So there's direct financial. Anyway, that hopefully I described carbon credits a little bit. All right. Yes, and we are exhaling, just so you know, we're exhaling CO2 right now. So every single one of us. CO2 is not the issue with the environment. It's not the issue with the planet, but they've literally made it into a pollutant. So when they talk about carbon, CO2, they lump it in as like, oh, this company is emitting chemicals into the air. Well, if you say that, so that's another part to insulate us from the financial part. Somebody said cowboys need to start an independent bank. We have to insulate ourselves from the world banks, because the banks are now starting to pressure. They're going to start pressuring the people who are high risk, which are, of course, anybody doing agriculture. They're going to become high risk if they sign on to these new frameworks, because they're all designed to make any human disturbance be a negative. It's a nature negative. So there are banks that are independently owned. They're privately owned. They're not associated with because some of the, just to survive, a lot of these smaller banks have to go to the bigger banks just so they have enough capital, which kind of sucks. But we need state banks like the state bank in North Dakota. that just do agriculture loans to isolate us from this stuff a little bit. But we also have to incentivize, we have to start paying for what we want, which is, and you got to find funding sources. That's why I'm talking about the sovereign dividend. We've got to create a different way that on the state level, at least, we pay into people who allow access and contribute actual conservation, not this preservation stuff. We've got to do that, or the money from outside is too enticing. Somebody will buy the land. That's what they're doing now. Like land trusts are buying huge ranches, and then they're using investor money to do it because now they can get the credits. They can sell the credits off the land if they remove the cattle and just let it sit there, lock everybody out, and then they can sell the credits and use that money to pay back the investors. So we need to stop that outside money from having that much influence in our state, because that's how we got wolves. I mean, it was all outside influence. The states here did not want wolves introduced, but it didn't matter because there was so much money and influence coming from outside the states that pressured us into doing it. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things. I like your idea. You know, we need to put things on credit cards and mortgages. I mean, some of the credit card companies are the worst at this. They're financing a lot of this stuff because they want to look green. They want to look, they want to look like they're helping the world. So ESG score is very important to them. So they're paying a lot of money into these credit programs. All right, I'm going to jump off now. I appreciate you guys getting on here. Yeah, I appreciate you guys getting on here, and have a great day. If you have any other questions, make sure you just let me know, and go to highlonesomesociety.com and to get my wolf threat report, which really kind of runs down from the top what the real threat is of the wolf. It's not really just the wolf on the ground. It's designed as a tool. So it's designed as a tool to facilitate all of this. And if you don't have wolves, then look for whatever animal is on the endangered species list in your area. That's what they'll use. And if they don't have one, which they're trying to do in California, like they don't have enough control in California already. All right. Well, you guys have a great day. Appreciate you being on. And God bless. There's a bunch of woodpeckers tapping on my office here.